The message arrived quietly, without warning, on a cold night when most of Earth was asleep. It was first detected by an automated listening station orbiting far beyond the moon, a machine built to hear what human ears could not. At first, the signal looked like nothing more than cosmic noise, a random pattern among billions of stars. But as the system continued to analyze it, the pattern repeated. It was structured, intentional. Someone, somewhere, was speaking. Within hours, scientists were alerted. The signal was decoded slowly, carefully, line by line. It was not aggressive. It was not a threat. It was a plea. The words, once translated, were simple and filled with fear. A civilization, not human, was asking for help. Their world was dying. Their people were being hunted. They had searched the galaxy for anyone who might listen, and by chance or fate, their cry had reached Earth at first. Disbelief spread through the scientific community. Many had spent their lives searching for proof that humanity was not alone. Now that proof had arrived, and it came with desperation attached to it. Meetings were called at the highest levels. Governments, military leaders, scientists, and diplomats gathered in secure rooms across the planet. The question was no longer whether aliens existed. The question was what humans should do now. The message described a civilization under attack. Their cities were falling. Their population was shrinking rapidly. They spoke of enemies who were stronger, more numerous, and merciless. The aliens did not ask for weapons. They did not ask for soldiers. They asked for help in any form: knowledge, medicine, protection, survival. Their words carried a quiet dignity, but beneath it was terror. They knew they were running out of time. Publicly, leaders spoke of hope and unity. They told the world this was a moment that would define humanity forever. News channels repeated the translated message again and again. People watched in silence as subtitles showed the words of beings who were not human, yet sounded painfully familiar. Families, children, elders, all could hear fear that mirrored their own history of wars, disasters, and near extinction. Across Earth, reactions were mixed. Some people celebrated, believing this was the beginning of a peaceful galactic community. Others were afraid, warning that responding could bring danger to Earth. Religious leaders debated the meaning. Philosophers questioned humanity's role. But one idea spread quickly and powerfully. If someone is asking for help, turning away would make humans no better than the monsters of their own past. Behind closed doors, however, the tone was different. Analysts studied every word, every pause, every hidden detail in the signal. Military intelligence searched for clues that were not spoken. They asked hard questions. Who were these aliens really? Who were their enemies? Why had no other civilization helped them? The universe was vast. Earth could not be the first to hear their cry. As more data arrived, the picture grew more complex. The alien civilization was technologically advanced, but not as advanced as humanity in certain areas. They had powerful energy systems but weak defensive strategies. Their enemies were not described in detail, only referred to as unstoppable and cruel. That vagueness worried human experts. In human history, truth was often the first victim of desperation. Still, the official decision was made to prepare a response. Humanity would not ignore the call. Research teams worked day and night to understand alien biology, environment, and communication methods. Engineers began modifying long-range ships for interstellar travel. Doctors studied how human medicine might translate to non-human bodies. The mission was described as aid, rescue, and first contact. Yet, as preparations continued, something else began to surface. Old human instincts, shaped by thousands of years of survival through conflict, quietly returned. Military planners insisted on escorts for every ship. Weapon systems were installed just in case. Defensive strategies were drawn up alongside humanitarian plans. The language shifted subtly: protection, security, threat assessment, risk elimination. Some scientists objected. They argued that arriving with weapons would send the wrong message, but history weighed heavily on every decision. Humans remembered too well what happened when they trusted blindly. Earth had learned, through blood and loss, that peace without strength often invited destruction. The stars were unknown. Hope alone was not enough. As weeks passed, more fragments of the alien message were decoded. There were gaps, missing records, sections that had been erased or damaged intentionally. This raised further concern. Intelligence teams suggested that the aliens might be hiding something not out of malice, but out of fear that the truth would stop humans from coming. Desperate people, human or not, often chose survival over honesty. Despite these doubts, the mission moved forward. Massive ships were assembled in orbit, unlike anything the world had ever seen. Officially, they were labeled as relief vessels. Unofficially, they carried the most advanced weapons humanity had ever built. The public was told this was for protection against unknown dangers in deep space. Most accepted that explanation. The night before launch, the alien signal played one last time in the command center. The voices sounded weaker now, slower. There was urgency in their tone that could not be ignored. Time was running out for them. For many listening, it no longer mattered whether the aliens had hidden the full truth. Lives were at stake. innocent lives. Human leaders stood before the fleet and spoke of responsibility. They said humanity had reached a moment where it could no longer think only of Earth. The universe had knocked on their door, and they would answer. But behind those words was another unspoken belief. If humans were stepping into a war, and they would not arrive as victims. As the ships powered up, a silent understanding spread among those in command. Help, in human terms, had never been gentle. Throughout history, humans had helped by fighting, by conquering threats, by ending conflicts through overwhelming force. Mercy, to them, often meant stopping suffering quickly, no matter the cost. When the fleet finally left Earth, disappearing into the darkness between stars, humanity believed it was sending hope. But woven into that hope was steel, fire, and the memory of every war humans had ever fought. The aliens had asked for help, not knowing what help truly meant to a species forged by endless struggle. And somewhere far away, as their dying world waited, the fate of two civilizations began to change. Long before the first shot was ever fired. Asterisk, as the human fleet moved steadily through the cold emptiness of space, analysts on Earth continued to study the alien civilization. What had once seemed like a simple plea for help was now showing layers of complexity that no one had anticipated. At first, humans had assumed that the aliens were innocent victims, desperately needing aid and protection. But the more the intelligence teams studied the data, the more they realized that things were not as straightforward as they had first believed. The aliens were indeed in danger, but they were also part of a larger, more violent system of power struggles, conflicts that spanned planets and species, and which often left devastation in their wake. Every transmission, every recorded movement of the aliens was analyzed for hidden meaning. The words "help us" suddenly carried multiple interpretations. Analysts discovered inconsistencies in their descriptions of the threat. Some parts of the messages hinted at a powerful enemy, but other details were missing entirely. The alien signals left gaps that humans, trained for caution, could not ignore. These gaps were not just missing information. They were warnings of potential traps. The aliens, terrified of their enemies, might have left out crucial truths to ensure humans would respond. Or, perhaps, their fear was so great that they had simply not seen the full picture themselves. Military advisors began to weigh in, quietly at first, then with increasing urgency. They reminded the scientific teams that humans had survived for thousands of years because they always prepared for the worst. If the aliens' enemies were as powerful as they claimed, sending humans as diplomats or mere aid workers could be disastrous. The argument was simple. Enter a war zone without weapons, and you become prey. Enter with strength, and you control the situation. Slowly, the original idea of a peaceful rescue mission began to shift. What had been intended as help was quietly becoming a calculated military operation. Asterisk, as the fleet approached the alien system, human leaders demanded more information about the local environment. Maps were reconstructed from satellite data, deep scans, and alien transmissions. Analysts discovered that the alien cities were strategically located, often near natural resources vital for survival. Their enemies had already destroyed parts of these cities, leaving ruins that hinted at previous conflicts. Humans realized that the aliens had survived repeated attacks, but their victories were limited and costly. Every piece of information suggested that this civilization was fragile, and that intervention required precision and force, not just goodwill. During this time, reports emerged that the aliens' so-called enemies were not simple invaders. They were highly organized, ruthless, and technologically capable of threatening multiple planets simultaneously. The humans began to understand the scale of the danger. A peaceful negotiation or humanitarian aid alone would be insufficient. There was a risk that a human mission, unprepared for conflict, could be destroyed before achieving any positive result. In essence, helping the aliens meant confronting their enemies and potentially being drawn into a larger, more deadly war. Inside the fleet, tension grew. Scientists, engineers, and military officers debated the best approach. Some argued for diplomacy, emphasizing that humanity should appear as benevolent protectors. Others insisted on preparation for combat, believing that only overwhelming strength could prevent catastrophe. The debate was heated, but the reality of the situation was impossible to ignore. Humans could not rely on the hope that the aliens' enemies would act predictably. Space was vast, cold, and filled with unknown dangers. Survival demanded caution, strategy, and power. The aliens' own transmissions were puzzling. Occasionally, they expressed relief that humans were coming, speaking of hope and gratitude. Yet at the same time, some messages revealed confusion or fear about what humans would do upon arrival. They seemed to understand the power of the fleet but could not predict how humans would act. This uncertainty made human analysts even more careful. They knew that the aliens were desperate, but desperation could lead to mistakes or even deception. Every choice had consequences, and misreading the situation could be deadly for both species. As humans got closer to the alien system, intelligence officers began to simulate various scenarios. They considered what might happen if humans intervened peacefully, if they provided medical aid, or if they engaged in diplomacy without force. Each scenario was modeled against possible alien responses, enemy attacks, and environmental hazards. The results were clear. Without superior firepower and precise planning, humans were vulnerable. The simplest form of help might lead to disaster. In other words, the mission to save lives had evolved into a mission to protect humans and aliens alike from annihilation. Meanwhile, on Earth, the public narrative remained hopeful. News outlets described the mission as a brave humanitarian effort, a sign that humanity was finally stepping into the galaxy as a responsible and benevolent force. Children watched in awe as stories of the distant world filled their imaginations. Families felt a sense of pride, imagining that humans were reaching out to save lives light years away. Behind the scenes, however, the reality was far more calculated. Every ship carried weapons, every crew trained for combat, every strategy focused on defense and control. When the first visual scans of the alien cities arrived, human leaders were stunned. The world they had hoped to rescue was far more complex than imagined. Towers rose high but were scarred by previous attacks. Energy grids flickered unpredictably, and defensive systems had been patched together with urgency and desperation. The aliens' enemies had been relentless, and it was clear that without intervention, extinction was inevitable. This reinforced the growing belief among humans that mercy alone was not enough. Strength had to accompany compassion. Human commanders began to rethink the concept of help entirely. In human history, aid had rarely been passive. Wars had been ended, famine alleviated, and disasters prevented through actions, sometimes violent, sometimes forceful, but always decisive. To provide true help to the aliens, humans decided, required not only offering support but also removing the threat entirely. This meant that when they arrived, they would not come as timid saviors. They would arrive as a force capable of changing the balance of power, capable of ensuring survival by any means necessary. As the fleet closed in on the alien system, tension and anticipation mixed in equal measure. The aliens were counting on help, but humans had begun to understand that helping was no longer a matter of generosity alone. It was a test of judgment, strategy, and human instinct. The fleet represented the culmination of humanity's history of survival, intelligence, and military experience. The aliens had asked for assistance, but humans now realized that their definition of help might not be what the aliens expected at the same time. Some humans questioned the moral implications. Could aid become domination? Was it ethical to intervene with overwhelming force in a conflict they only partially understood? Ethical debates persisted quietly among officers and scientists. Still, the calculations were clear. If humans failed to act decisively, both species could perish. Delay could be fatal, and hesitation could destroy everything. The stakes were too high for uncertainty in the quiet hours before entering the alien system. Every human on the fleet reflected on what lay ahead. Scientists imagined first contact, diplomats imagined peace, and military officers imagined battle. But beneath it all ran a common thread. Humans had a responsibility to act, not as witnesses but as protectors, capable of imposing order in chaos. The aliens had asked for help, but humans had begun to realize that helping meant preparing for war, whether anyone wanted it or not. By the time the fleet reached the outskirts of the alien system, the final pieces of analysis were in place. Humans had mapped enemy positions, predicted likely attack strategies, and determined optimal points of intervention. They had chosen not to wait passively for a disaster but to arrive prepared to control it entirely. The aliens might still imagine rescue as gentle or benevolent, but humanity had transformed the concept into one shaped by centuries of survival, conflict, and understanding of what it meant to protect life against all odds. When the first images of alien defenders and enemy forces appeared on screens, within the human command centers, the mission's purpose crystallized. Humans were not merely responding to a plea for help. They were responding with a strategy, a plan, and a readiness that the galaxy had rarely seen. The aliens had asked for assistance, but humans had begun to understand that their role was not just to save. They were there to impose the certainty of survival, even if that certainty arrived on the edge of a sword dot in the end. The first step toward helping the aliens was not negotiation, not diplomacy, not medical aid. It was understanding the full danger of the situation, preparing for the worst, and transforming the mission into a calculated demonstration of human strength. The aliens would not simply be saved, they would be defended by a species that had learned that true help often required both compassion and the unwavering power to enforce it. By the time the first human ships entered orbit, the stage was set. The aliens were waiting for aid as they had imagined it, but humans had already decided that their aid would be delivered in a way no one could ignore. The line between help and war had begun to blur, and in that space between hope and fear, the true human response to the alien plea for help was taking shape. When the human fleet finally arrived near the alien system, the situation became clearer than ever, yet more complicated than anyone had anticipated. From a distance, the planet looked serene, a glowing blue and green orb floating in the darkness of space. But as the fleet approached, sensors revealed the truth. The planet was scarred by conflict, cities were damaged, energy grids were unstable, and small fires burned in some of the once great urban centers. Alien structures, though technologically advanced, showed signs of desperate repairs and hasty defenses. The aliens themselves moved cautiously, their ships and patrols scanning for threats that seemed invisible to human eyes. What humans had anticipated as a rescue mission was beginning to feel like stepping into a war zone. The aliens expected help in the form of medical aid, engineers, or supplies. They imagined humans landing peacefully, offering their advanced technology to patch what was broken and save lives. They did not imagine warships, fleets of heavily armed vessels, or the strategic precision that humanity had brought along. To the aliens, humanity's arrival was shocking. The sheer scale and power of the fleet were unlike anything they had ever witnessed. They had pleaded for help, but what arrived was an unmistakable statement of military strength. The shock and awe in the alien command centers were palpable, and some leaders began to whisper doubts and fears, wondering if humans were truly coming to help or had their own hidden agenda. Inside the human command centers, there was no misunderstanding. Every officer, scientist, and strategist aboard the fleet understood their mission had changed. The goal was still to save the aliens, but the method was no longer delicate negotiation or cautious aid delivery. Humans had analyzed the alien enemies, predicted their strategies, and understood that a direct, decisive approach was required. Waiting to negotiate or mediate could allow the alien enemies to strike first, and humans could not allow that risk. The human approach was simple in concept but overwhelming in execution. Eliminate the threat decisively before it could harm either the aliens or humanity. The first interactions between humans and the aliens were tense. Messages were sent in every known frequency and language. Humans projected calm, peace, and assistance, but the underlying power behind those messages was clear. The aliens received the communications with cautious relief, mixed with awe and fear. They had asked for help, but the scale and preparedness of humans were far beyond what they expected. For some alien leaders, it was almost impossible to reconcile the humans' peaceful words with the unmistakable readiness for combat that filled the orbiting fleet. Meanwhile, the enemy forces lurking near the alien system began to notice the human fleet as well. These were the beings responsible for the alien civilization's suffering, highly aggressive and organized, with a history of destroying entire settlements. They did not initially recognize the full scope of humanity's capabilities. Unlike previous civilizations the aliens had called for, humans did not hesitate, calculate endlessly, or make cautious threats. They acted. The moment the enemy ships attempted to approach, the humans responded with precision and overwhelming firepower. The aliens, witnessing the scene, were struck by the immediacy and decisiveness of the action. Human strategy was methodical, using intelligence gathered from long-range scans and analysis of the alien enemy's previous engagements. Humans targeted key command centers, supply ships, and weapons platforms. The attacks were swift but calculated to minimize civilian casualties. Even in the midst of war, humans adhered to rules shaped by centuries of experience in conflict. Understanding the value of strategic precision, the aliens, many of whom had been helpless observers of their own world's destruction, watched as humanity neutralized threats they had lived under fear of for decades. It was unlike anything they had ever seen, a species that understood the stakes and acted without hesitation, combining both force and calculated mercy. As battles erupted in orbit and around key planetary points, humans maintained communication with the aliens to ensure safety and avoid unnecessary harm. That explained where enemy forces were, which areas were dangerous, and which sectors were under human control. The aliens struggled to comprehend the speed and efficiency of the human actions, whereas they had waited years, sometimes decades, for outside help. Humanity had arrived not only ready to act, but with the ability to control entire conflict zones in hours. The aliens' fear slowly shifted to a cautious admiration as they witnessed humans turning the tide of what had seemed like inevitable destruction. The aliens also began to understand something fundamental about humanity. Humans did not fight recklessly or for vengeance alone. They acted strategically, with a focus on ending conflict quickly and decisively. In human terms, mercy often came in the form of overwhelming power neutralizing threats so that suffering could end. This was a difficult lesson for the aliens to accept. They had always imagined aid as careful intervention, something tender and protective. Humanity's version of help was stark, direct, and at times, terrifying. Yet it worked. Their world, damaged and fractured, began to stabilize as enemy forces were subdued or eliminated at the same time. Human leaders were constantly re-evaluating their approach. They balanced aggression with caution, ensuring that civilian areas were protected while focusing attacks on military installations. Every decision was monitored and adjusted in real time, drawing on decades of Earth-based military doctrine adapted for space warfare. While the aliens had called for help, humans recognized that survival required more than hope. It required immediate action, clear planning, and a willingness to fight if necessary. Their approach reflected the hard lessons of Earth's history. Strength and decisiveness were often necessary to protect life. In the midst of the chaos, humans also reached out to alien scientists, engineers, and leaders to share strategies for rebuilding defenses and protecting civilians. They taught new ways to shield cities, secure energy networks, and maintain communications. While the humans' military might ensure safety, their knowledge transfer helped the aliens take control of their own survival. The combination of protection and guidance began to change the aliens' perception of humans from overwhelming outsiders to powerful allies who could save lives in ways they had never imagined. The war did not last long, in human terms, though it felt like an eternity to those who had already endured years of fear. Human efficiency, combined with superior planning and technology, dismantled enemy forces systematically. Alien survivors, who had grown accustomed to helplessness, watched as humans achieved what they had once thought impossible. Cities once on the brink of collapse began to stabilize. Energy grids, previously unreliable, were secured. Communication networks, essential for coordination, were restored. The alien civilization, though shaken, began to breathe again by the end of the first major phase of intervention. A clear understanding emerged between humans and aliens. Humans had arrived expecting to help, but the nature of help had changed. Peaceful assistance was insufficient in a world shaped by relentless aggression. The aliens realized that survival sometimes required force, and humans had provided that in a way that combined intelligence, strategy, and sheer power. What had begun as a rescue mission had become a demonstration of humanity's unique ability to balance protection with decisive action. The aliens' initial fear of humans gradually transformed into trust. They recognized that the humans' overwhelming display of power was not intended for domination but for protection. It was a lesson that would stay with the alien civilization forever. When humans intervene, they do so with clarity, preparation, and an unshakable determination to ensure survival. While the methods were intense and sometimes frightening, the outcome was undeniable. Lives were saved, and the enemy was no longer a threat. As the dust settled from the initial conflicts, humans maintained a vigilant presence, patrolling key areas, monitoring energy flows, and providing guidance to alien leaders. Their work was not complete. Rebuilding a civilization scarred by war would take years, yet the aliens had begun to understand a profound truth. Help from humans was not what they had expected. It was more powerful, more immediate, and more transformative than anything their history had known. Humanity had arrived with a promise, and they had kept it, though not in the way anyone could have predicted in this phase. The line between aid and combat blurred. The aliens had asked for help, imagining healing and support. What they received was human intervention in its most authentic form, a combination of protection, strategy, and controlled force that ended immediate threats and saved lives. That aliens would remember this moment forever, not just as the arrival of aid, but as the moment humanity redefined what it meant to help. By the time the fleet prepared for the next phase, humans had accomplished something extraordinary. They had arrived as outsiders, ready to offer assistance, and emerged as the decisive factor that could control the fate of an entire civilization. The aliens, who had expected only care and compassion, now understood that humans gave help in the form of strength, strategy, and certainty. And in doing so, they had changed the course of a dying world forever. The war did not stop when the first wave of enemy forces was defeated. In fact, it intensified. The aliens' enemies, though shocked by the humans' efficiency, quickly regrouped and attempted counterattacks. They had underestimated humanity's strategy, their speed, and their willingness to act decisively. From the very beginning, humans had understood that survival in this region of space required not just intervention, but total control over the battlefield. They could not allow half measures or hesitation. The moment humans saw weakness, the enemy would strike again. Every movement of the fleet, every deployment of troops, and every calculated strike was designed to end the conflict quickly while minimizing further loss of life. Among both humans and aliens, human commanders coordinated with precision. Each ship, each squad, and each weapon system operated in perfect alignment, using intelligence gathered from alien systems, scouts, and intercepted communications. They identified the strongest enemy positions and neutralized them with remarkable efficiency. Unlike previous battles the aliens had fought, where chaos and fear dictated outcomes, the humans acted with methodical calm. Their strikes were surgical, precise, and devastatingly effective. Alien soldiers and leaders watched in disbelief as their forces, once confident and feared, were systematically dismantled without mercy, yet with intent to avoid civilian casualties wherever possible. The aliens themselves had mixed emotions. Relief was immediate. Humans were saving them from annihilation, but fear lingered. They had asked for help, expecting care and protection. But humans responded in a way that combined salvation with terrifying power. Some alien leaders worried that humans might not stop once the enemy was subdued. Yet, over time they began to notice a pattern. Humans' actions were controlled, calculated, and measured. They fought to end threats decisively, not to conquer or destroy indiscriminately. This distinction was subtle but critical. Humanity's method of war was different from anything the aliens had ever experienced, terrifying in capability but precise in purpose. As the battles raged across the planet and its orbit, humans simultaneously worked to secure vital infrastructure. Alien cities that had been damaged were protected and stabilized. Energy grids were repaired and fortified to prevent further attacks. Communication systems were restored, allowing alien leaders to coordinate with their own people. Every strategic move by humans had dual purposes: to eliminate the enemy and to rebuild the alien civilization's ability to survive independently. Humans understood that victory was not just about defeating an enemy, it was about leaving the aliens capable of protecting themselves in the future in space. The humans' warships outmaneuvered and outgunned the enemy. Advanced targeting systems allowed precise strikes on enemy fleets, while defensive measures protected both human and alien assets. Every maneuver was calculated to reduce risk and maximize impact. Alien observers had never seen such synchronization, where their own forces relied on brute force. Humans relied on intelligence, prediction, and adaptability. When one enemy ship attempted to evade capture or destruction, humans anticipated the move, intercepting and neutralizing it before it could act. For the aliens, this was both awe-inspiring and unsettling. They realized that humans were not just participants in war, they were masters of it. On the ground, humans deployed special teams to secure key locations. Alien populations, who had spent years living under constant fear of attacks, watched these teams move with precision. Buildings once thought lost to chaos were stabilized. Resources were protected, and defenses were set up to prevent future threats. The aliens had never seen help delivered in this way. It was immediate, efficient, and thorough. Humans did not wait for problems to escalate. They identified threats and neutralized them before they could cause harm. Every act of war was simultaneously an act of protection. Despite the overwhelming force, humans communicated constantly with the aliens. They explained actions, predicted enemy movements, and reassured them that these attacks were necessary to ensure long-term survival. This level of transparency was new to the alien civilization. In their history, help often came in the form of diplomacy or delayed assistance. Humans, however, combined guidance with action. The aliens began to trust this approach, understanding that humans were acting not out of conquest, but out of responsibility and a unique understanding of what it took to save lives in a violent universe. As the enemy forces continued to weaken, humans adapted their tactics. They anticipated counterattacks, set traps, and used misinformation to disorient the remaining opposition. Alien soldiers, who had once felt invincible, were forced into retreat. Their strategies, honed over generations of conflict, were no match for the adaptability, intelligence, and relentless discipline of the human fleet. Every victory was methodical, every defeat deliberate, and every maneuver calculated to reduce unnecessary loss. For the aliens, it was an education in a new kind of warfare, one that balanced destruction with protection and strategy with mercy. Amid the chaos of battle, human teams also began to coordinate recovery efforts. Fields, supply depots, and civilian areas were protected as enemy forces were neutralized. Human engineers and medical units worked alongside alien counterparts to stabilize communities, heal the wounded, and prevent further panic. This simultaneous approach combining war and aid was unlike anything the aliens had ever experienced. It was shocking, frightening, and awe-inspiring all at once. They began to realize that humans did not fight for glory or revenge. They fought to ensure life could continue. As the fighting neared its peak, the alien enemies' morale began to collapse. They had never faced an opponent that could predict their moves, counter their strategies, and act with such precision while maintaining a moral framework that limited unnecessary harm. Humans' method of intervention was transforming the battlefield into a controlled environment where survival, not destruction, was the ultimate goal. Alien commanders began surrendering positions, retreating, or negotiating under conditions set by humans. The tide had turned so decisively that the war, which had once seemed endless, was now approaching an inevitable conclusion. During the final phases of active combat, humans concentrated on clearing remaining enemy strongholds while ensuring the safety of alien populations. They coordinated precise strikes against heavily fortified positions while evacuating civilians from danger zones. Alien leaders were amazed by this level of coordination. Humans were able to simultaneously wage war, provide aid, and restore order. In every action, the focus was clear: end the conflict, protect the innocent, and stabilize the planet for the future. The alien civilization, long traumatized by relentless attacks, began to feel a cautious sense of security for the first time in decades. The alien enemies were effectively neutralized. Their remaining forces either surrendered or fled, unable to continue the fight against humans' superior strategy and planning. Alien leaders who had feared annihilation now began to understand the true nature of human intervention. Help from humans was not passive. It was active, decisive, and absolute. Humans did not merely fight alongside the aliens, they removed the threat entirely, ensuring that survival was not a temporary reprieve but a long-term reality. The aliens began to adjust to this new reality. They were alive, their cities were stabilized, and their enemies had been subdued. Humans remained vigilant, providing guidance and monitoring potential threats, but the alien civilization could now start rebuilding. The combination of protection, strategic warfare, and guidance gave the aliens a renewed sense of agency. They realized that while humans' methods were extreme, the results were undeniable. Lives were saved, threats were eliminated, and their civilization could endure. In reflecting on these events, the aliens came to a difficult but profound understanding. Survival sometimes required force, and true help might not look gentle or kind. Humans had redefined aid for them. Instead of cautious negotiation or delayed rescue, humans had acted decisively, combining protection with power, guidance with strategy. This was not what the aliens had imagined when they sent their pleas for help, but it was far more effective than anything they had hoped for. As the battle subsided and the dust of destruction settled, humans maintained a protective presence around key areas, monitoring remaining enemy activity, repairing critical infrastructure, and continuing to train alien forces in defense and strategy. Their mission had expanded beyond rescue. It had become a complete intervention designed to stabilize a civilization, eliminate threats, and leave the aliens capable of defending themselves in the future. Decisive action combined with strategic intelligence, overwhelming power balanced by a focus on preserving life, and an understanding that sometimes the only way to truly help is to confront danger head-on. The aliens, who had expected mere assistance, now understood that help from humans came with both mercy and force, and that survival under humanity's guidance was guaranteed only through strength, precision, and an unyielding willingness to act. The alien civilization had been saved, but the method was unforgettable. It was a lesson they would carry forever. Humans helped in a way that changed the balance of power, neutralized danger completely, and ensured that life, no matter how fragile, could continue. What began as a request for aid had become a story of decisive intervention, strategic mastery, and an unshakable commitment to preserving life at any cost. By the time the dust of battle settled and the last of the alien enemies had been neutralized, the galaxy was quiet again, but it was a quiet that felt entirely different from before. The aliens' world, once teetering on the brink of total destruction, was now breathing with a fragile sense of hope. Cities that had been damaged in countless skirmishes were stabilized. Energy grids were operational again, and communication networks that had once been severed were restored. Survivors, who had spent years living in fear, cautiously stepped out from hiding, witnessing the magnitude of what humanity had achieved. For them it was astonishing. A species they had never fully understood had arrived not merely to help, but to change the course of their civilization entirely. The aliens had expected aid in the simplest form: medical supplies, repairs, perhaps even protective shelters. Instead, humans had brought something far more profound: a combination of decisive power and strategic intelligence that ensured survival. The difference was startling. Whereas previous attempts at assistance by other civilizations had been tentative, slow, or ineffective, humanity had acted with certainty and precision. Their approach was neither reckless nor cruel. It was focused entirely on eliminating threats and creating an environment where life could continue safely. The aliens, who had long believed that hope was fragile, now had a chance to experience survival on a scale they had never imagined possible. As humans continued to monitor and secure the planet, alien leaders began to grasp the full extent of what had occurred. Entire enemy networks, long thought invincible, had been dismantled. Command centers, supply lines, and military installations had been neutralized or captured. The alien soldiers who had once fought tirelessly against what seemed like an unstoppable foe now faced a new reality. Humans had acted as both protector and judge, using power not to conquer, but to secure life itself. Slowly, fear was replaced by a cautious trust. The aliens began to understand that humanity's notion of help was inseparable from their willingness to act decisively, even with overwhelming force. Meanwhile, humans worked tirelessly to stabilize the alien population. Medical teams treated the wounded, engineers repaired critical infrastructure, and strategic advisors helped the aliens understand how to maintain their defenses against any future threats. It was not a simple handover. Humans guided every step, ensuring that the aliens would be capable of protecting themselves once the fleet withdrew. This level of engagement went beyond assistance. It was mentorship, training, and empowerment combined with protection. The aliens realized that humans did not intervene for glory or control. Their goal was survival, and their methods reflected a centuries-old understanding of what it took to preserve life in a dangerous universe. Despite the immense relief, there was also a profound shift in perspective for the aliens. They began to see that help and war could exist simultaneously. The fleet that had seemed overwhelming, even frightening, had been essential for their survival. Humanity had shown them that sometimes aid requires decisiveness, strength, and the willingness to act without hesitation. It was a lesson both terrifying and inspiring, that aliens could see that without such intervention, their civilization might have continued to struggle for survival, caught in endless cycles of fear and attack. Now, they had a future, a fragile, yet tangible, chance to rebuild and grow. Human leaders, while ensuring the aliens' safety, also began the delicate task of establishing long-term protocols for cooperation. They trained alien forces in defense strategies, shared knowledge about advanced technologies, and demonstrated the importance of proactive planning. Every action was designed not just to protect the present, but to secure the future. The aliens, who had never known such guidance, watched carefully and learned quickly. They realized that survival required more than hope. It required understanding, preparation, and the courage to act decisively when necessary. Humanity's intervention had taught them that mercy often comes in the form of control, planning, and unyielding determination. As days passed, the planet slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. Markets reopened, communities began to rebuild, and the energy systems stabilized fully. Alien families cautiously ventured out of hiding, witnessing for the first time in years a world no longer dominated by fear. Children, who had never known safety, began to play under the watchful protection of human patrols. The adults, still wary, gradually allowed themselves to hope. The aliens' perception of humans evolved from fear to respect, then to gratitude. It became clear to them that the humans' definition of help was not gentle, but it was absolute. In the aftermath of conflict, humans took time to ensure that no lingering threats remained. Small bands of enemy survivors were tracked, their ability to coordinate attacks dismantled. Strategic strongholds were neutralized or converted into safe zones for alien populations. Every action had a dual purpose: to prevent future conflict and to reinforce the aliens' ability to manage their own safety. Humanity's intervention was complete in the sense that the immediate danger was gone, yet ongoing guidance ensured that the aliens would not fall back into vulnerability. The aliens, witnessing the efficiency and decisiveness of human intervention, began to reconsider their own history. They realized that previous generations had survived not through hesitation or caution, but by adapting, learning, and acting decisively when necessary. Humans had taken this concept to a new level, combining power with intelligence in a way that was both terrifying and life-saving. It was a profound lesson, one that would shape the alien civilization's strategies, culture, and approach to conflict for generations to come. For humans, the mission had been more than a display of strength. It was a test of principles, of judgment, and of what it meant to help. They had arrived expecting to offer aid, but they had transformed the concept entirely. Aid, in human terms, often meant decisive action, strategic planning, and the willingness to confront danger directly. Mercy was delivered not as hesitation, but as overwhelming protection. The aliens learned this lesson firsthand, understanding that humanity's strength was inseparable from its compassion, and that real help sometimes required the full application of force. As the last phases of stabilization concluded, humans began to withdraw their active presence, leaving the aliens with control over their own world. The survivors, who had once depended entirely on outside help, now had tools, knowledge, and experience to protect themselves. Humans left behind a legacy of guidance, protection, and lessons in survival. The aliens understood that while the humans had departed, the impact of their intervention would last indefinitely. That civilization had not only survived but had been empowered to thrive in ways they had never imagined. In the quiet aftermath, the alien leaders gathered to reflect on what had transpired. They had asked for help, and humanity had answered, but not as they had expected. The answer had come with force, strategy, and intelligence, yet with the singular goal of preserving life. The aliens realized that their survival had depended not only on human strength, but also on their understanding of what it truly meant to intervene decisively in a dangerous universe. The lesson was clear. Sometimes help requires action, sometimes mercy requires force, and sometimes survival requires understanding power in its fullest sense. The story of this intervention would remain with the alien civilization forever. They would tell their children of the humans who had come from the stars, not to conquer, but to save. They would describe the fleet that had arrived with overwhelming strength, and the precision with which it had removed threats while preserving life. They would remember the moment when the balance of their world had been restored, not through diplomacy or cautious aid, but through decisive action guided by the principles of survival, strategy, and protection. For humanity, the mission was a reaffirmation of its capabilities, ethics, and responsibility. They had faced the challenge of aiding an alien civilization and had done so by combining strength with purpose. They had proven that when humans intervene, they do so fully, decisively, and effectively. Their actions ensured that life could continue, that civilization could endure, and that hope was not a fragile illusion, but a force backed by preparation, intelligence, and unwavering determination. The galaxy had witnessed something extraordinary. The aliens were alive, their civilization stabilized, and their enemies defeated. Humanity had answered a plea for help, but in doing so, it had redefined what help meant. The aliens understood that help from humans was absolute, sometimes terrifying, but always effective. They would remember this intervention not only as a moment of survival but as a transformation of their world, a lesson in strength, strategy, and the true meaning of mercy. The aliens' world had been saved, not by hesitation or hope alone, but by decisive, intelligent action guided by the principle that survival required courage, force, and careful planning. Humanity had delivered aid in the only way that ensured it would endure. The aliens would never forget that the humans had come as protectors, as warriors, and as allies, and that when humans answered a call for help, They did so with a force and certainty unlike anything else in the galaxy.